Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs. And this episode will be in Matthew 27, verses 1 through 10, I believe, the first couple of sections of this chapter here as we look at two characters' responses to the story that's happening, namely the fates of Jesus and Judas, as they are intertwined, and Matthew plays them against each other in just these first few verses here. Now, last time we finished off chapter 26, let me remind myself what was in there. We finished off with Jesus on trial, a fake trial where people were lying about him and they still couldn't get anything to stick. Jesus was on trial and Peter had an opportunity to be faithful and confess who Jesus was, and yet he doesn't. He instead lies about him and walks away and abandons the one who is his Lord. Well, Jesus isn't only abandoned by Peter. He's been abandoned by all of the apostles, but one in particular has betrayed him the worst, which is the disciple Judas. And yes, even though he betrays, he is still a disciple at this point. I think it's just not about to last for very long, because it's all about done. So we get to chapter 27, in Matthew 27, starting in verse 1. When daybreak came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death, and after tying him up, they led him away and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that Jesus was condemned, was full of remorse, and returned those 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood," he said. "What's that to us?" they said. "See to it yourself." So he threw the silver into the temple and departed. And then he went and hanged himself. The chief priest took the silver and said, "It is not permitted to put it into the temple treasury, since it is blood money." And they conferred together and bought the potter's field with it as a burial place for foreigners. Therefore that field has been called the blood field until this day. Then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him whose price was set by the Israelites, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. This is it's a few verses, it's not much, and yet it's horrifically sad. Firstly, you see Jesus' fate in the first couple of verses. You see Jesus' fate as the chief priests and the elders, as the leaders of the Jewish people. They hate him so much, the Jews hate him so much that they put him to death. They decide to lead him away. They're going to have him executed, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately for them. The Jews don't have a right to execute people, given that they are vassal states to the Roman Empire, given that they are under subservience to Rome. They can't actually kill Jesus of their own accord, but if they convict him in a trial, maybe they can have a Roman trial and also get him convicted, which would actually get him killed. But if they can't even have their own trial, if they can't convict him in their trial, they're not going to convince Rome that he's a criminal. And so they have to go through the formalities of convicting Jesus as a Jew before they can convict him as a Roman citizen. And so first step here, they've convicted him. They plot against Jesus to put him to death. That's in verse 1. And then after tying him up, they lead him away and hand him over to Pilate. Everyone hates Jesus. The Jews hate Jesus. The apostles hate Jesus because all of these 12 men, Jesus' best friends, they have all abandoned him and they're leaving him. Peter especially has slapped him in the face by being so close and yet so very far. Judas especially has slapped Jesus in the face by actively handing him over to the people who are going to try and kill him. Jesus has been abandoned because everyone hates him. The Jews are out to get him. And then the perspective shifts. We drop Jesus off with Pilate, and we're going to leave him there. And then we'll pick up with him in a couple minutes after we talk about this other character, which is Judas. We also want to know Judas's fate, the betrayer of Jesus. What happened to him? What consequences did he face? What came about because of his actions? Judas, his betrayer. In verse 3, he looks at Jesus, and it's really weird. In the wording in verse 3, he sees that Jesus has been condemned, And then he's full of remorse, and he returns the money that the chief priests paid him. The Jewish leaders paid him money to hand over Jesus to them. Now he's sad that Jesus has been handed over to them by him, and so he gives their money back, like that's going to fix anything. He's asking for a refund on his purchase, but there isn't one, and there can't be. They paid him to do this service. He's done this service, and now he says, I've sinned by betraying innocent blood? Yeah, yes? Did he not understand that before? Did he not see that before? Really? But they reply in verse 4, what is that to us? We don't care. That's not our problem. We paid you for a service. You gave us the service. You succeeded. We paid you. If you don't want the money, tough. You worked for us. We gave you your just reward. And here you go. He gets rid of that silver. He doesn't want it anymore. It's blood money now in verse 5. And so he throws it into the temple. And then he goes and, he decides that he doesn't deserve to live. And he takes away his own life. The priests see that and say, this is blood money that we paid for a betrayal from friend to friend of an innocent person, and we held a false trial and everything. This is blood money now. It's no good anymore. And so they buy a field so that they can bury people in it, because that's all it's good for. They're very callous with this conversation. They're very matter of fact. Hey, this is what happens. Well, we have blood money, can't keep that in the treasury, might as well go buy something with it. So they just buy a field and bury some people there. Congratulations to them. They made a cemetery. The money they paid for Jesus was to execute an innocent man, and now that same money is being recycled just so that they can bury more humans. That's all they're interested in is death. That's all they're interested in is killing and having people removed. And so Jeremiah prophesied that. There were 30 pieces of silver, and I bought a potter's field for it. I bought a field with that money, and that's what they do in the New Testament, and that's how that works out. In Jeremiah, it's a different picture, I'm sure. I haven't specifically looked into that quote, but in Jeremiah, he goes out to buy the potter's field because God just tells him to randomly, and the priests don't realize they're fulfilling God's plan all along. They're fulfilling what God had laid out and established beforehand. They are fulfilling the words of Jeremiah and the actions of Jeremiah as God directed him 700 years before, however many hundred years before it was. They're doing exactly what Jeremiah said they would. Even though Jesus doesn't want to do this, right? Even though God doesn't want to have to kill his son for this, he has to. And so he's going to use the Jewish leaders' evil, and he's going to use their evil tendencies because he can. They offered them, they're bad people, and by sustaining their evil, they allow God to use that to ultimately turn it into something good. That's where the end of the story is, but right now, it certainly doesn't look too bright. Jesus is hated by all the Jews, but Judas just hates all the Jewish leaders. They're opposites in that way. Jesus is an innocent man condemned to die. Judas is a very guilty man who is not condemned to die and yet condemns himself anyway. Why? Why does he do that? Some people think various different things. Maybe it is that he is fulfilling the law. If you kill somebody, your life is forfeit and you should be killed. Maybe he's just committing justice on himself. Maybe he's following after the old law. If you have killed another human being, you deserve to die. And he recognizes that, and so he kills himself. Maybe. That's not a good reason to, but maybe. Maybe he is trying to hold to the old law. Maybe he is trying to do something good. Maybe he is trying to repent of what he did. It doesn't work. It's not enough. That's not how the system works. He ignores what Jesus did for him back in chapter 26. In verse 28, when Jesus is talking about the cup and the Lord's Supper, in verse 28 of chapter 26, he says, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." And remember, we pointed out in Matthew's account, Judas never leaves the upper room. Judas is included in that. He could have come back. He could have heard this, seen the things that he did, and realized he was evil, and then repented of them, and started working for Jesus. He could have been one of the 12 again. He just didn't want to. He thought he was too evil. He thought God couldn't save him. He thought he'd done something so unbearably evil that nothing could ever right it. And so he tries to do his best to right it, which is ultimately just offing himself, and that doesn't do anything. Ultimately, Judas's actions don't fix anything. Judas tries to fix things. He tries to step in, and he tries to offer his own solution to God. The problem is, it doesn't do anything, because man can't save himself. And man can't do anything to fix the problem that he's in. And mankind are the ones who mess up, and then oftentimes when we try to make things right, we just make them worse. Judas is in that situation. He's betrayed Jesus. How do I make that right? Oh, I can get rid of myself. Now 2 humans are dead. And what did you gain? Maybe you feel a little better about yourself. That doesn't matter. Judas tries to fix the situation by himself, and it doesn't work. Because humans can't fix the situation by themselves. None of us can fix our natural and sinful state, not like we're born with it, but what we've chosen. We can't fix our sinful state by ourselves. We're called to go to God, because he's the one who can fix it. Jesus bears this injustice well. He is silent through all of it. He doesn't complain, but is willing to die for everyone. Whereas Judas, well, he betrays Jesus, and then he doesn't deal with it very well. He ends up getting rid of himself, which doesn't solve anything, and is a tragic end to his character. I don't know where he's at. I don't know. I'm not God. I cannot tell you whether he is in heaven or in hell. I don't know. But it doesn't look good. When you do betray Jesus, when you do betray God, when you do sin against him, the answer is not just getting rid of yourself. The answer is turning around and serving him to the best of your ability. Peter betrayed Jesus, but Peter turned around and served God. And that has helped a lot more people than Judas's actions ever did. Don't be Judas. I shouldn't have to say that, but don't be Judas. But rather, turn back to God. Don't just give up on your life. Cool. I think that'll do it. This is a little shorter than it has been recently, but hopefully that is digestible and understandable. And hopefully you find something useful in that. Something that is helpful or thought-provoking or is in some way beneficial and encouraging to your life. That's what the aim is, that's what our goal is, and that's what I'm hoping for as we continue in this series. We don't have many more to go in the book of Matthew. Maybe 3 or 4 more weeks in chapter 27. That sounds like a lot. Maybe 3 or 4 more in chapter 27, and two or 3 more in chapter 28. But by the end of March or by mid-April sometime, we should be finished with this great book. And then you'll have the whole story of Jesus, at least in Matthew's account, as recorded for you throughout the past couple of years. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you benefit from this to whatever extent, and I hope that it's helpful. And I will see you on the next episode of Biblical Breadcrumbs.